We met when I was a newly graduated IT engineer with big dreams of developing software for international companies. She had just started her career as a lawyer, full of drive and ambition. I was immediately fascinated by how confident she was. There was an intensity in her gaze that drew me in. I was shy and reserved, yet deeply curious about this woman who didn't seem afraid of anything. When we started talking, I noticed how she gladly took the initiative and drove the conversation forward. I leaned back and let her lead, which at the time felt comfortable and calming. Eventually, we started dating. I remember how I used to surprise her with little gifts, flowers, chocolates, and other thoughtful gestures. She seemed to appreciate it, but she was always one step ahead, planning the next dinner out, the next outing, or the next social event. It suited me well back then. I like having someone else take control over things I didn't feel entirely comfortable deciding. Because I was conflict averse, I found it hard to express what I really wanted. It felt easier just to go along with her plans, and she seemed to enjoy making decisions. After 2 years of dating, we moved in together. I had secured a steady job at a small private IT company where I worked on everything from troubleshooting clients' network issues to developing system solutions. I felt proud of finding a job that provided both security and opportunities to grow. During the same period, Olivia received good recognition at the law firm where she worked. We got married after living together for about a year. I was happy, excited, and maybe a little proud to have such a wife. She was the one who suggested we have a simple ceremony with just close family and friends, which surprised me because I thought she would want a grand wedding. But she said it was more practical to keep it simple. I had no objections to that. For me, what mattered was building a future with her, not the details of the ceremony. When we stood there exchanging vows, everything felt right. Life looked bright, but slowly things began to change. At first, it was small things that I didn't really notice. She suddenly decided that we would always have takeout on Fridays, eat vegetarian on Wednesdays, and have a deep cleaning session on Sundays. None of it seemed unreasonable, so I went along with it. I was fairly comfortable with her taking charge of everything. I let her lead and was relieved to avoid arguments. If I ever had a differing opinion, I might cautiously ask, "Are you sure we need to clean tomorrow? I have some work to catch up on." But she would firmly reply that weekends were for cleaning, and the house had to be spotless. If I pressed further, she'd just smile, say she knew best, and walk away. A few years went by. She took bigger and bigger strides in her career and became a very successful lawyer. At home, I started to notice that she had nearly total control over everything that happened. Sometimes I dismissed the thought that it was abnormal, perhaps because I feared confrontation. Looking back, it was relatively peaceful in the beginning. I did what she wanted and she seemed satisfied. Occasionally, though, I felt a little sad about how she dictated our weekends, our meals, who we invited over, and when we went out. But I didn't dare take the fight. I blamed my aversion to conflict and convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. One of the first times I truly felt small in front of her was when we discussed our future plans to have children. We had been trying for a while, but weren't successful. We went for fertility tests, and eventually we were told that I couldn't have children. It was hard to take in. I felt an intense sense of shame, especially when she refused to talk openly about it with me. She was irritated and seemed to place the blame on me, even though she rarely said it outright. Sometimes she'd make small, cutting remarks. I tried to apologize, but for what? I still tried to stay calm. She became increasingly cold. When friends asked if we were considering adoption or other options, she would just roll her eyes and change the subject. I understood that she was harboring anger over the fact that I couldn't give her children. It was tough to deal with. A few years later, the issue of finances came up. She wanted us to have a joint bank account, which didn't seem strange to me. But she also suggested that my entire paycheck be deposited directly into it since she said she was better at managing expenses and planning. I thought it sounded practical, and I wanted to show that I trusted her. But soon enough, I realized I no longer had any access to the money. She changed the passwords and deposited my salary without me even seeing how much came in. When I asked about getting my own card, she said it wasn't necessary since we were married. She gave me a weekly allowance every Monday, a small amount that barely covered lunches if I ate out. When I cautiously pointed this out, She told me to pack lunch if I thought restaurants were too expensive. I did as she said. I was entirely dependent on her approval for any additional expense. It didn't take long before I started feeling thoroughly humiliated. My friends wanted to go out for a beer or eat at a restaurant, but I couldn't pay. I was ashamed. When I told Olivia that it was difficult always having to ask her for money, she dismissed me. She said I was exaggerating and that it was about her taking responsibility. I didn't know what to do. I often called my childhood friend Michael to unload my feelings. He suggested that I confront her properly, but that scared me. Olivia was a lawyer. She was used to winning arguments. I felt inferior. One Friday, we were going to meet a mixed group of her friends and some of mine at a bar. I was already nervous in advance about how it would go. I hoped I would at least have enough money to pay for something, but my weekly allowance was nearly gone. I remembered buying a birthday present for Michael, which had eaten up almost all the small amount I had received. Olivia had said I'd get a new allowance on Monday, but it was Friday now. I hadn't dared to ask for more before we left. When we arrived, she laughed and chatted with her friends while I tried to stay in the background. After a while, she called out to me, saying she wanted a drink. I froze. I didn't have any money. I tried to catch her eye, but she deliberately avoided looking at me. I quietly approached her and whispered that I didn't have any money left. She pretended not to hear. I stood there with some of my friends beside me and some of hers across from us. It felt like an eternity. Finally, she turned to me and snapped. What now? Have you already blown through your weekly allowance? Several of her friends laughed. My friends looked embarrassed. I wanted to sink through the floor. She pulled a bill from her wallet and handed it to me as if I were a child. The mocking look in her eyes made me feel incredibly small. When I went to the bar to get the drink, I could see her friends smirking at me. I didn't understand why. I tried to shake off the shame and returned to Olivia with the drink. Not a word of thanks, just a cold smile, as if to say, I have power over you. A few days later, I heard that she had told her friends I wasn't just bad with money, but also in bed. She claimed I was poorly endowed and that she always had to finish herself off afterward. That last comment broke something inside me. I had suspected she didn't think I was good enough sexually, but for her to brag about it to friends was brutal humiliation. When I brought it up with her, she got angry. She called me ridiculous, said she hadn't said anything like that, and accused me of exaggerating. I didn't know what to believe or feel. I had already heard it from several people, and her denial only made it worse. I felt like I couldn't trust her at all, but she still managed to make me doubt myself. Despite it all, there was a desperate hope in me that she would change, as I often said to Michael and Sarah. That night, when we got home from the bar, a violent argument broke out. I was so furious that I yelled at her, completely out of character for me. I had never raised my voice like that before. I accused her of destroying my confidence in front of our friends and said I couldn't take it anymore. She rolled her eyes and said I might as well leave her, but I had nowhere else to go. I fell silent. It was true. All the money was in her account, and I didn't even have gas money. I turned around, went to the guest room, and locked the door. I heard her shouting that I needed to grow up, that I was a coward who couldn't handle a normal discussion. The next morning, I woke up early before she was up. I put on my sneakers and went out for some air and peace. I walked around the block, trying to figure out what I could do. I saw no way out, no way to get money together. I felt trapped. For a long time, I had thought about making a plan, but I hadn't been able to take the step. When I returned to the apartment, she was sitting in the kitchen, flipping through the newspaper. She looked up and told me to clean the kitchen and living room. She also announced that I wouldn't be getting any allowance for the next 3 weeks as punishment for being so ungrateful. I said nothing and went back to the guest room, locking the door again. I heard her banging on it, yelling that I had to come out. I refused to respond. I felt the anger bubbling, but also something inside me saying, enough is enough. I sat down on the floor, pulled out my phone, scrolled to Michael's number, and called him. He answered immediately, and I told him everything. I asked him to come and get me. He said, of course, it was fine, and that I could stay with him and Sarah as long as I needed. I felt a sense of relief, but also a sharp fear. Olivia would never accept me leaving her just like that. But I decided there was no other way out. I packed some of my most important belongings into a bag. I looked for the car keys, but couldn't find them. I searched through drawers, jacket pockets, but they were gone. It was clear she had hidden them. When I realized this, I called Michael again and told him he had to come and pick me up because I couldn't drive. During the call, I heard Olivia in the background, walking around muttering angry words about how I was a traitor, a coward, and other things I won't repeat. Michael heard it too. He told me to stay in the guest room and that he and Sarah were on their way. I promised I would. But when I opened the door to head toward the hallway, Olivia came rushing at me. She screamed that I was worthless and threatened me, saying I wouldn't survive a day without her. I tried to push past her. She went into the kitchen, grabbed a marble pestle from the countertop, and threw it at me with full force. I didn't duck in time, and it hit me just above the side of my head. It felt like a heavy blow, and I felt the blood begin to trickle down my ear. I became dizzy. She stood there, wide-eyed, looking almost shocked at what she had done. I grabbed my bag and staggered out the door. Just then, Michael and Sarah pulled up in their car. They saw that I was bleeding and yelled for me to hurry into the back seat. Olivia ran after me, screaming insults. She seemed completely out of control. They hit the gas, and we drove away. My wound turned out to be superficial, but I had to go to the ER to get it cleaned and documented. At the hospital, they took pictures and wrote in my chart that the injury came from a blow to the head. The nurse quietly asked me what had happened, and I felt ashamed as I admitted it was my wife who had thrown a pestle at me. She gave me a sympathetic look and said I should consider contacting the police. I promised I would think about it. Inside, I felt a dizzying anxiety about the future. Where would I live now? How would I manage financially? Michael and Sarah welcomed me into their home with great warmth. They set out food for me, gave me clean sheets, and let me stay in their guest room. It was overwhelming to feel such kindness after all those years of coldness. I actually cried a little out of relief as I lay in bed that first night. The clock showed the early hours when I heard my phone buzzing repeatedly. Olivia was sending texts, one after another. Some were apologies. "I'm sorry, I lost control, but you provoked me." Others were outright insults. "You're pathetic. You've ruined everything. You should be ashamed." She also tried to claim I was the cause of her behavior, that it was all my fault. It was a mix of apologies and accusations. I muted the phone. I couldn't deal with it at that moment. The next day, I went over everything with Michael and Sarah. They said there was no turning back, that I had to report her to the police. I felt torn. My wife was a lawyer. She could probably twist the situation to her advantage. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt I could no longer live in her shadow. Michael accompanied me to the police station. I explained everything to a female officer who seemed very understanding. She took pictures of my injury, wrote down my account. I signed a report of assault, and they later asked me to include the hospital records. I felt a glimmer of hope, and at the same time, an icy fear of how Olivia would react. Filing a police report against a lawyer for assault was not something I had ever imagined doing in my life. When I returned to Michael and Sarah later that day, I was completely exhausted. I tried to eat, but had trouble swallowing. Olivia continued to send texts, alternating between apologies and anger. I turned off my phone completely to get some peace. That evening, we discussed what the next step should be. I felt I needed professional legal help to file for divorce and make sure Olivia could no longer control me. Michael and Sarah looked up a law firm online that had a good reputation in family law and domestic violence cases. On Monday, I called the firm and explained the situation. They scheduled me for a meeting that afternoon. I felt relieved it was happening so quickly. At the same time, I was nervous about sitting down and recounting everything, but I knew it was necessary. Afterward, I went to my workplace to speak with my boss. I hadn't been there since the incident and wanted to explain why I needed help with my paycheck. I was afraid he might think I was resigning or something like that. When I sat down in his office, he looked concerned and asked what had happened. I explained that I didn't want to quit, but needed to change the account where my salary was deposited because Olivia controlled the current one. He got up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said he understood and would handle it with the payroll department immediately. He also said he wanted me to stay and that I was a valuable employee. Then he made an offer I didn't expect. He said he could arrange a bonus equivalent to 3, maybe 4 months' salary to help me get back on my feet. I was stunned. I accepted and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I would now have the chance to find my own place and pay for legal help if needed. After meeting with my boss, I went straight to the law firm. There, I met a man who listened intently to my story. It was hard to tell, as I felt ashamed. It was also the first time I laid out the entire sequence of events in detail, from the psychological terror that had slowly escalated to the physical violence with the pestle. He asked gentle but pointed questions, and at the same time, he made it clear this was a serious case of abuse, and that we shouldn't hesitate to pursue it fully. I could tell he had a lot of experience. He suggested I follow through with the police report, which I had already filed, and also add psychological abuse. He said it was obvious I had been subjected to prolonged control and degradation. Then we talked about divorce. I admitted I didn't want to speak to Olivia again. He explained I could grant him power of attorney to handle everything. That way, I could avoid direct contact with her. I felt relieved by that solution. I signed the authorization and felt like I was finally taking charge of my life. During the week, the police contacted me and told me they had been to Olivia's place and seized the pestle. She had been questioned. They also called me in for a new interview that lasted several hours. They wanted all the details about her psychological abuse, how she had controlled my finances, how she had humiliated me in front of friends, and how she had threatened me. It was tough, but also a relief to tell the story for the first time. They brought in Michael and Sarah as witnesses, and apparently some of my other friends too. Everyone confirmed they had seen how poorly Olivia treated me. Some of Olivia's own friends were probably hesitant to speak, but a few also shared how she had openly mocked me in front of them. The lawyer helped me secure a new apartment fairly quickly, a simple 2-bedroom place near work. I bought some essential furniture with the bonus I had received. Finally, I had freedom. I no longer had to follow her schedule. I took my clothes, which Michael and Sarah helped me retrieve, some technical gadgets I had stored in their garage, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt almost light. Olivia never called me, but she did send texts now and then. For a while, she tried to apologize. Then she went silent. I understood that the lawyers had started negotiating on my and her behalf. One day, my lawyer received a settlement proposal from hers. It stated that if I completely withdrew the assault report, she would give me 75% of the value of the apartment and our joint assets. I almost laughed when I heard it. Sure, it was tempting financially, but it was so clear she was trying to buy her way out of the consequences of her actions. I said no. I told them I was willing to settle for 50%, but the report would stand. After everything I had been through, I no longer felt like letting her get away with it. The next day, she raised the offer to 85%. It was an enormous amount of money, but I stood firm. The lawyer said it was entirely my choice. I replied that money wasn't the most important thing. What mattered was that there were consequences for her behavior. I couldn't stand to see her continue to appear as a spotless lawyer who only pursued others' mistakes in court when she was capable of such cruelty at home. The prosecutor filed charges for assault and psychological abuse. The trial took a while to get started, but eventually I sat in the courtroom with my lawyer and saw Olivia on the other side. It felt strange and surreal. She was dressed in a neat suit, looking almost pale and subdued. She made no big gestures during the trial, speaking only through her lawyer. I listened to testimonies from my friends, from Michael and Sarah, and from some of Olivia's friends who had dared to come forward. I felt proud of those who spoke the truth. Olivia's defense tried to argue that I had exaggerated. They claimed I was mentally unstable and had provoked her into self-defense. But that fell apart when several people testified to how she had humiliated me and when physical evidence of the pestle injury was presented. Additionally, the police had found and documented bloodstains on it. The verdict came: 2 years and 1 month in prison for aggravated assault and abusive behavior. She appealed, but the higher court upheld the sentence. The very same day the initial verdict was announced, she lost her job. I later heard from acquaintances that she was immediately fired. A conviction was devastating for a lawyer. She had to leave town and move far away where no one knew her to have any chance of finding work. I tried not to let Schadenfreude take over, but after all those years of humiliation, I couldn't help but feel it was just. I had nothing left of the love I once felt for her. It was all gone. What remained was a deep sadness that it had come to this. I had loved her once. I had wanted a life with her. Now she was gone forever, and my future looked completely different. When the divorce was finalized and all legal procedures were complete, I received 50% of the value of our joint assets. I was satisfied with that. I hadn't wanted to let myself be bought out, and even though 50% wasn't a huge amount, it was enough for me to live comfortably. It felt like I was finally taking the first step into a new life. No more cleaning on her command. No more begging for money to buy dinner. No more counting weekly allowances. I was free. Still, my inner feelings were mixed. I felt relieved, but also empty. All those years of psychological and physical pressure had left their mark. I would wake up at night with a knot in my chest, needing to remind myself that I no longer had to fear what awaited me in the kitchen in the morning. I didn't have to defend myself against cruel comments about my masculinity or my ability to manage money. I didn't have to hide from someone trying to hurt me. It was over, but it would take time for me to heal the wounds. Michael and Sarah continued to be incredible support throughout the process. They invited me to dinners and movie nights. They understood I needed time to heal. Occasionally, they tried to cheer me up and hinted that there might be a nice woman out there who could help me believe in love again, but I mostly shook my head. I had no plans to enter a new relationship. I could barely imagine letting someone into my life again. I often said I would never want another relationship after what I had been through. They didn't insist but smiled understandingly and said I would change my mind when I was ready. To this day, I'm not sure. Maybe one day I'll dare to believe in love again, but only time will tell. My colleagues at work noticed I had changed after everything that happened. I walked in with a straighter posture, took more space in meetings, and started to speak up about my opinions on the projects we were working on. My boss noticed I was thriving now that I no longer had someone constantly pushing me down. I got more and more responsibilities and eventually a promotion. It was a strange feeling to finally stand on my own 2 feet, although it also made me feel guilty when I thought about how I had let Olivia control me for so many years. I couldn't change the past, but I could influence my future. During the first few months in my new apartment, I occasionally received letters addressed to both of us. I opened them with some anxiety, fearing they might be new demands or attempts at pressure. But most of the time, they were ads or other unimportant things. One day, a letter arrived with her name as the sender. My pulse quickened. I didn't know why she would send me anything when our lawyers had handled all the contact. It was a short letter where she apologized. She wrote that she didn't expect me to ever forgive her, but that she needed to write it down. I felt torn between a certain sympathy and a reminder of everything she had done. I tore the letter into pieces and threw it away. Perhaps it was a step toward my own healing. I think I needed to free myself from everything that reminded me of how she had crushed my self-confidence. After the trial, when she received the news that her appeal was denied, I heard she had packed up and left town. She must have been desperate, without a job and with a shattered reputation. I felt no need for revenge or to see her suffer. I was mostly indifferent and just wanted to move on with my life. She had received her punishment, and I didn't need to waste more energy on her. The divorce was already finalized, and I officially received half of everything. I bought a small car, used but good enough to drive around without having to ask anyone's permission or for money. I wasn't rich, but it was enough. It was a strange feeling to see my name on the car's ownership document, such a simple thing that symbolized my new freedom. I remembered all the times I had tried to ask her for the car keys and how she had refused to give them to me. Now I'm continuing my work at the company and enjoying it more than ever. I feel appreciated for my skills. I no longer worry about my salary disappearing into someone else's account. I often think about how naive I was to let her take over my finances completely. Looking back, it was a way for her to slowly control me and make me powerless. If I had spoken up earlier, perhaps it wouldn't have gone so far. But hindsight is always clearer. Today, I look at myself in the mirror and think that I've grown from this, even though it was a terrible experience. Sometimes I wonder what life would have looked like if I hadn't been able to escape, if she hadn't thrown that pestle and physically injured me. It sounds ironic, But that violent act was the direct spark that finally made me leave her. What if she had only continued with psychological abuse, but never used violence? Would I have stayed for several more years, thinking it was just a little tough dominance? I'm grateful I had Michael and Sarah, who stood by me without hesitation. Without them, I might not have dared to take the leap. I'm also relieved that the police, my boss, and my lawyer were so willing to help me. I've learned a lot about myself. I still carry my fear of conflict, but I'm working on not letting it control my life. I'm trying to take up space, set boundaries, and say what I think. I've realized that if you don't speak up about small things, they can grow into enormous problems. If I ever meet someone new, I know now that I must dare to say stop when something feels wrong. I never want to experience being completely controlled again. I will never again give up my salary, my keys, or my self-respect. Sometime after the trial, I had a dream. I dreamed I was back at the bar with Olivia and her friends. She yelled at me to buy her a drink, and I stood there without money, paralyzed with shame. In the dream, I suddenly turned around and said loudly, "You can get your own drink. I'm not your servant." I felt a sense of freedom when I said it, a relief that vibrated through my entire body. When I woke up, I realized I had never said those words in real life, but it was as if, in the dream, I finally became the person I needed to be. The story of me and Olivia is not something I'm proud of, but I'm also not ashamed. I was in love, and I did what I thought was best. No one deserves to be controlled and humiliated in that way, regardless of gender or role in the relationship. I sometimes hear comments from acquaintances saying it's rare for a woman to abuse a man, but that's not true. It happens. It happened to me. And I hope that if someone else finds themselves in my situation, they find the strength that I eventually found. Now it's been quite some time since all this happened. I've settled into my two-bedroom apartment, furnished it simply, and I feel good. When I come home after work, I can decide for myself what to have for dinner, when to clean, or how to spend my free time. These are small things I didn't think much about before, but now I see them as symbols of my freedom. I no longer need to justify how I spend my money or time. I've started working out at the gym to strengthen my body and take care of myself. I sleep better, I feel calmer, and I'm beginning to believe that life can be good without someone else controlling me.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.